Hey everybody, Space Wizard here, with part 4 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. Every single card in the set has been revealed, so for this review, I'm going to be going over all the remaining class cards. Starting off with the Druid Cards, we've got Forbidden Ancient, a 1/1 for 1 with a battle cry that spends all of your mana and gives it +1/+1 for each mana spent. This card seems really awkward because at 1 to 4 mana, it's straight up bad. It will always be below average, whereas Forbidden Shaping, for instance, will be more often than not at least average. There are also way more cards competing for a slot in Druid decks, so it's hard to justify running a card that's only ever going to fill out your curve. Fandral Staghelm is a legendary 3/5 for 4 with your choose 1 cards have both effects combined. To clarify, minions that transform will be given the benefits of both transformations. This card is obviously very strong, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. If your deck has a fair number of choose 1 cards, then this will be an auto-include. Feral Rage is a 3-mana spell that either gives your hero +4 attack this turn or gives your hero 8 armor. This card isn't super strong, but the flexibility on it is pretty decent. Both effects are mana efficient, and the armor gain is pretty much straight up better than Healing Touch. If your deck needs healing, then this is going to be your go-to card, I think. Addle the Grizzly is a 2/2 for 3 with after you summon a minion, give it +1/+1. I can see this card being good in token druid decks. It's like a half a hobgoblin that affects everything that you summon, so if you summon enough minions, it's gonna be mana efficient. I just don't know if it would be worth running because there's so many other good druid cards, but there would have to be a really strong combo to justify it, I think. Next are the Hunter cards, starting with Carrion Grub, a 2/5 beast for 3. 2/5s historically haven't been very strong 3-drops, so unless your Hunter deck is starved for 3-drop beasts, then I don't think this is going to be getting played. Fiery Bat is a 2/1 beast for 1 with a death rattle that deals 1 damage to a random enemy. Now that Zombie Chow doesn't exist in Standard, this is far and away the best 1-drop that Hunters can play. I expect that it will be played in just about every single Hunter deck. Infested Wolf is a 3/3 beast for 4 with a death rattle that summons 2 1/1 spiders that are also beasts. This card is basically a balanced piloted shredder that guarantees you're going to have a beast on board for Kill Command or Houndmaster. This is a staple for every Hunter deck except maybe Face Hunter. On the Hunt is a 1-mana spell that deals 1 damage and summons a 1/1 hound. This card is essentially just an Elven Archer except it's a beast and a spell. Given that Hunters have never played Elven Archer before, I highly doubt that this card is going to see any play. Next are the Mage Cards, starting with Anomalous, a legendary 8/6 for 8 with a death rattle that deals 8 damage to all minions. I really dislike this card's design. A delayed board clear is always bad, and if you're playing a minion for 8 mana, then you really want it to have a big immediate impact on the board. This is easily the most unplayable legendary out of the whole expansion. Cold Sorcerer is a 3/2 for 2 with spell damage +1, and after you cast a spell, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. This might see play in a Mage Cthulhu deck if they're even good enough to be played, but outside of that, this just doesn't seem like a worthwhile 2-drop when you have so many other good options in Mage decks. Shatter is a 2-mana spell that destroys a frozen minion. This is way too conditional with the current freeze effects in Standard to be played. When you consider having to play a very specific spell in order for this card to even be triggered, Polymorph stands out as the much more reliable option for hard removal. Next are the Paladin Cards, starting with A Light in the Darkness, a 2-mana spell that discovers a random minion and gives it +1/+1. It's really hard to justify discovering something completely random for 2 mana when you could just as easily put a minion that will always be good into your deck and draw into it normally instead of playing this card. The +1/+1 the minion gets just isn't relevant enough for this card to be good. Divine Strength is a 1-mana spell that gives a minion +1/+2. The effect here is just too small for this to be worth a spot in your deck when there are so many good 1-mana minions you could be playing. I would be very surprised if this card ends up being playable. Rallying Blade is a 3/2 weapon for 3 with a battle cry that gives all of your minions with Divine Shield +1/+1. Right now there doesn't seem to be many minions with Divine Shield that are playable in Standard, so I don't expect that this card will see any play, especially since it heavily conflicts with True Silver Champion. Selfless Hero is a 2/1 for 1 with a death rattle that gives a random friendly minion Divine Shield. This is easily the best 1-drop in the Paladin's arsenal now that Zombie Chow is out of the picture. I expect that this will see play in both mid-range and aggro decks. Next up are the Priest Cards, starting with Hooded Acolyte, a 3/6 for 4 with whenever a character is healed, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. Obviously a staple for Priest Cthulhu decks, but outside of that it won't see any play since Priest decks aren't particularly interested in raw stats. Twilight Darkbender is a 6/5 for 5 with a battle cry that restores 10 health to your hero if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack. This is another go-to for Priest Cthulhu decks that won't be playable in any other archetype. Power Word Tentacles is a 5 mana spell that gives a minion +2/+5. This just costs way too much to be relevant. For 5 mana you can be doing so many other things that will impact the board way more than this. It's just flat out unplayable. Darkshire Alchemist is a 4/5 for 5 with a battlecry that restores 5 health to a character. This card is like a super antique healbot. It can target minions, it has better stats, it synergizes with Akanai Soul Priest and Embrace the Shadow. There are so many reasons to run this card that I can't see it not ending up being a staple. Next are the Rogue cards, starting with Journey Below, a 1-mana spell that discovers a random Death Rattle card. Since most of the strong Death Rattles are leaving standard, and because you could just as easily put a good Death Rattle minion into your deck instead of this card strikes me as 100% unplayable. Shadow Strike is a 3-mana spell that deals 5 damage to an undamaged character. This is essentially just a combo-less alternative to Eviscerate. It's a good removal spell, so it'll absolutely get played, probably as a one-of. Bladed Cultist is a 1/2 for 1 with combo, gain +1/+1. A 2/3 for 1 is exceptional, but only when played on turn 1, so I don't know what they were going with for this card. If Aggro Rogue ever becomes viable, then it's possible that this card will be played in it, but for now this is just unplayable. Blade of Cthulhu is a 4/4 for 9 with a battlecry that destroys a minion and adds its attack and health to your Cthulhu. This card is way overboard in a mid-range Cthulhu deck, since in that variant you're looking to win the game through tempo, and 9 mana removal is just going to get stuck in your hand. But in an OTK Cthulhu deck, this will be one of your strongest assets. I expect that in that variant it will be played as a one-of, since running 2 9-drops will slow you down too much. South Sea Squidface is a 4/4 pirate for 4 with a death rattle that gives your weapon +2 attack. After the Blade Flurry nerf, I don't see any reason how this card could get played. Its stats are just too poor to justify the free deadly poison attached to it. Maybe you could see play in pirate decks if they end up being good, but I very much doubt that's going to happen. Next, the Shaman Cards, starting with Eternal Sentinel, a 3/2 for 2 with a battlecry that unlocks your overloaded mana crystals. This is simply just a minion alternative to Lava Shock that will still be around next year when BRM gets cycled out of Standard. As Lava Shock already sees play, this will see just as much play. Evolve is a 1-mana spell that transforms your minions into random minions that cost 1 more. A lot of people are saying that this card is going to be good, and while I don't think that it's a bad card, I have a hard time justifying putting it into your deck and Constructed. Shamans don't run a lot of card draw, and you really need a lot of minions on your board for this to be good. I think it's very comparable to Circle of Healing, since you pretty much need the majority of your minions damaged before you play this, because they could get transformed into something weaker. I don't expect that this is going to get played, but it's possible that we could see it as a one-of. Flame Wreathed Faceless is a 7/7 for 4 with Overload 2. This is essentially a strictly better Fireguard Destroyer. The stats here are big enough that if your opponent doesn't have an answer immediately, then they're going to lose the game. And now that BGH has been nerfed, you can expect that this will get played in every single Shaman deck. Primal Fusion is a 1-mana spell that gives a minion +1/+1 for each totem you have. Since you'll rarely have enough totems on the board for this to be good, it's probably the most unplayable card in the set. Stormcrack is a 2-mana spell that deals 4 damage to a minion with Overload 1. This card isn't overcosted or anything, but it's really hard to justify running a spell like this with Overload when it can't hit face. I don't expect that this will see any play. Next, the Warlock Cards, starting with Darkshire Councilman, a 1/5 for 3 with after you summon a minion, gain +1 attack. This is just too slow and unreliable to be good, it won't see any play. Darkshire Librarian is a 3/2 for 2 with a battlecry that discards a card and a death rattle that draws a card. Since discard decks don't exist yet, this card won't get played, simple as that. Forbidden Ritual is a 0-mana spell that spends all of your mana and summons that many 1/1 tentacles. In a vacuum, this card isn't very strong, but because the Sea Giant variant of Zoo is going to be the strongest Zoo variant after the BGH nerf, this card has lots of very relevant applications. It's going to proc Sea Giants, Gormok, and possibly Reliquary Seekers. It also starts getting mana efficient by itself at the 5 mana mark, so I expect that it's going to see play in Zoo as a one-of at the very least. Usher of Souls is a 5/6 for 5 with whenever a friendly minion dies, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. This will see play in Warlock Cthulhu decks, but it won't see play in any other deck. And lastly, the Warrior Cards, starting with Bloodhoof Brave, a 2/6 for 4 with Taunt and Enrage +3 attack. This card just isn't very strong, but because Warrior is going to be starved for 4-drops in Standard because of Deathspite cycling out, I can actually see this being a contender for the spot if Kor'kron Elite isn't enough by itself. Bloodsail Cultist is a 3/4 pirate for 3 with a battlecry that gives your weapon +1/+1 if you control a pirate. If pirate decks are playable, this will get played in them, simple as that. Blood to Ichor is a 1-mana spell that deals 1 damage to a minion and summons a 2/2 if the target survives. This is sort of like a conditional Cruel Taskmaster that doesn't buff the minion's attack, so I have a hard time justifying putting it into your deck when warriors don't even run Cruel Taskmaster right now. It might possibly see play as a 1-of, but I doubt it. Malkarog is a legendary 6/5 for 7 with a battlecry that equips a random weapon. I did the math and there's about a 40% chance of getting something that makes this card really good, and a 20% chance of getting something that makes this card really bad. Given that the neutral 7-drop pool is pretty weak in standard right now, and a decent number of cards that you can equip off of this will make it broken, like Doomhammer or Gladiator's Longbow, I actually think that this is going to be the go-to 7-drop for warrior decks. That's all for this part of the review, guys, but the 5th and final part should be uploaded shortly after this one, so just check the channel if you'd like to watch it. If you want even more Hearthstone content, head on over to hearthhead.com or either of its social media pages. See you next time, everybody.